Okay, so we're going to be looking at 4.1. The title is Species, Communities, and Ecosystems. So this chapter is very heavy in content, and once you know the different definitions of the vocabulary here, you should be able to apply it in identifying different types of species in the ecosystem. So let's start with the definition of species. So definition of species are organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. And if you have a group of those species in the same area at the same time, we call that population. And if there are many different kinds of populations in an area, we call that community. And your community interacting with your abiotic factors in the environment, you call it an ecosystem. So let's go back to species. Now, what are species? Depending on their mode of nutrition, we can either categorize them as autotroph or heterotroph. Simply put, autotroph are organisms that can make their own organic compounds using inorganic materials such as your plant. So they can make organic compounds like carbohydrates using inorganic materials such as carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so autotrophs. Then we also have heterotrophs. Now, heterotrophs are organisms that cannot make their own food. They need to obtain their organic compound from other organisms or by feeding or eating other organisms. And there's also what you call mixotroph. I'm not going to write it here in the concept map. But mixotroph are species that can either be autotroph or heterotroph. An example will be a unicellular eukaryote, your euglena. It can both photosynthesize and it can also get its nutrients from other sources. All right, now your heterotroph, so again, these are organisms that cannot make their own food. They have to obtain the organic material by feeding on other organisms. So keyword there is feeding. So there's two types of heterotrophs. You have your consumers and your decomposers. So your consumer, depending on their level in the food chain, they can either be a primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, or quaternary consumer. Now, you can only go up to the fifth trophic level or quaternary consumer, as explained in class, because as you go each step on the food pyramid or each trophic level, as one species feeds another species, many of this energy is actually wasted in the form of heat. So not a lot of energy is passed on to the next organism. So we can only go up to 5 trophic levels or a quaternary consumer. And then our decomposer. So you have two kinds of decomposers, your detritivores and your saprotrophs. So decomposers, they decompose dead or decaying organic matter, for example, a dead leaf or a dead animal. And what's the big difference between the two? I would say size. So detritivore are larger organisms, while your saprotrophs are smaller ones. So your saprotrophs will be your bacteria, your fungi or molds. And okay, going back to your detritivore. So examples of what they eat are feces, hair, feather, dead leaves, other parts of plants that are decaying, and these are decomposed by detritivore. Examples are your worms, larvae, or in the ocean, as I've mentioned, clams, shrimps. So all of those decompose dead organic matter. Now, if you don't have decomposers, your wastes will accumulate in the ecosystem, and you don't want waste to accumulate. You have to find a way to recycle these wastes. You have to find a way to detoxify the ecosystem, because what will happen if you have a lot of waste in the ecosystem? Then the ecosystem will not be sustainable. All right, so for your saprotroph, as I've mentioned, that's your bacteria or your fungi. And the difference between the two is the detritivore, as you know, decomposes your organic material by internal ingestion. So it consumes the decaying matter. Whereas saprotroph, because they're really, really small, they can only decompose the material by excreting enzymes. Okay, so they excrete enzymes first, and then the organic matter will decompose outside of their cell. And once it has decomposed, they will then absorb those nutrients into their cells. Maybe a classic example for this would be if you leave your bread, or bread or fruit, like an old fruit, and then it will rot over time. You see the color changes. You can't see it, but microscopically, organisms or bacteria have been releasing enzymes to slowly digest that organic material. So, next concept is, I highlighted the idea of interdependence in 4.1. Now, species are never in isolation. They always have to interact with each other or with its environment, ecosystem. So those interactions assures that nutrient can be cycled in the ecosystem, and it will lead to sustainability, which basically just means that the ecosystem is self-sustaining. It can go on and on and on for hundreds to thousands of years because all of the nutrients that are needed in the ecosystem are provided by exchanging it between your species or exchanging it between the species and the environment. Now, for an ecosystem to be called sustainable, you have to remember three key ingredients. First, there should be nutrients. Now, these nutrients, where are these coming from? Let's say from the soil. So there are different types of minerals there in the soil. It can also be in the air, like the carbon dioxide or water that is absorbed by your plant. And then this is very important, energy. Without energy, or without the sunlight, there's no initial source of energy that can be used by the plants to make their food. Okay? And then detoxification. As I've mentioned before, you don't want your waste to accumulate in the ecosystem because it will result to an ecosystem that is not sustainable. If there's just a lot of waste, imagine different kinds of species that might be affected by the waste or that might be killed by the waste. So there should also be detoxification. And for the nutrient cycle, we have a separate chapter for that, the carbon cycle, where we will be looking at the carbon cycle in particular. But please know that there are many kinds of nutrients that need to be recycled or cycled in the ecosystem. We can't just buy it from the store. We need to cycle it between your, again, organisms and the environment. And then many years from now, if we're all dead, I'm pretty sure the ecosystem that we have right now will still continue on because these nutrients are just going to be recycled or cycled. So let's end with saying that 4.1 really should help you understand that everything in the ecosystem is just a circle of life. Okay, thank you.